Extra, extra! Read all about it! Jack the Ripper kills Fifth in Miller's Court.
With the inquest into Mary Jane Kelly's death concluding she was murdered by persons unknown, this marked the end of Jack the Ripper's reign of terror, as oddly, the press's interest had begun to wane. With the Second World War looming like an ominous fog of death, the murders of 3 dead women in a seedy part of Soho, French Fifi, Marie Cotton and Dutch Leia, seemed insignificant. Just months before, the tabloids had slathered with talk of fear, menace and mystery, as a foreign monster with an ape-like gait slayed a slew of unworthy women in a fevered panic amidst the West End sex trade. Whereas once, the Soho Strangler was an international sensation, but now his crimes and his victims weren't worth the ink. As the public's only source of fact, the press had misled and lied to keep the myth about a serial strangler alive, having even distorted witness testimony and derailed an investigation in the name of circulation. The murders were unnervingly similar, but this could easily have been just a coincidence. The press would state his victims were petite French brunettes. Only one was English, and given that a woman's average height in the 1930s was 5'1", and most prostitutes trafficked into London were French, the law of averages would suggest that they looked similar. As with where the women were murdered, most lodgings for sex workers in Soho's red light district consisted of rooms above a shop, accessed by a single street door and subdivided into small bedsits. As for his method of attack, knocking a girl semi-unconscious with a fist to the face and strangling her with a hand or a stocking, it's not an uncommon assault, as it happened to Fifi just 1 week before. With no robbery, no sexual assault and no fingerprints, there was no conspiracy or cover-up, as being in and out too quick to leave any hint of his identity. As the police had said right from the start, the most likely suspect was a man who frequented brothels and had a history of violence against prostitutes. In short, they may have argued over money. He hit her. He panicked and then strangled her to stop her screaming. And that's the problem. Serial killers are front-page news, whereas a sad, cowardly little man getting angry at being overcharged for sex is not. Like the others, she was known by many names: Elsie McMahon, Charlotte Torkin, Fifi, French Marie, French Paulette, and to some simply as the French woman. And like Roger Vernon's mistress, she was also known as French Suzette. Only her life would begin far from the streets of Paris. Lottie Asterley, as her birth certificate states, was born on the 15th of December 1889 at Croydon Workhouse Infirmary in South London. Known as Elsie Charlotte Asterley, she was the illegitimate child of Nora Asterley, an English domestic servant. And although unlisted, her father was possibly an Irishman called McMahon. Although described as a petite French brunette, with a billowy cloud of reddish-brown hair, she was a little taller, a little older, and although all of the women were slightly curvy, she was larger and bustier than the others. As a toddler, Marie, as she liked to be known, was placed into care and raised at our day-of-the-day convent at Boulogne-sur-Mer in France. Which is why, being a fluent speaker with a Côte d'Opale accent and only able to speak in broken English, those who knew her often mistook her as French. No longer a ward of the state, in 1905 she returned to England, living in the West End with her mother. And that year, aged just 16, Elsie Charlotte Asterley married Victor Tocken at St Pancras Registry Office in a very brief marriage of just 6 months, before she fled to France with a man known only as Mr. Richard. Said to be in newspapers, she followed him from England to France and on to Guadeloupe for 6 years. How they lived, what they did, and for what reason will never be known, until the outbreak of the First World War, when she returned to London. And being an unskilled woman, unable to divorce, she would furnish her meagre wage as a chambermaid, as well as her addictions with casual prostitution. Sex work filled a financial hole, but it was the hole in her heart which left the biggest gap. Investigated, but with proven alibis for the day of her murder, Marie had 2 men who she loved. Jean-Émile Ormond was a French bigamist who she called Papa and lived with on Chitty Street. And although it's unknown if he was her pimp, she aided his deportation and she hadn't seen him since. Second was Norris Norton, a married draper's shop owner, educated in Belgium and fluent in French, who was a man who clearly loved her. Letters in her flat spoke of his undying love. But having grown tired of her binge drinking, their relationship had begun to drift. 1 week before her murder, he politely suggested they split. He didn't see her after this date, and when the police informed him of her death, he genuinely looked heartbroken. In her 48 years alive, Marie's life was often loveless and hard. But she never gave up. Often homeless, she didn't sleep rough, as casual work could fund her a night in a refuge. Or through prostitution, she would get men to buy her a drink, a meal, and a place to sleep, in return for sex and a little money. She didn't have a pimp or a ponce. And as a part-time prostitute, French Marie was widely liked, but known by few. She hadn't been threatened. She had no known connections to the other victims. And she sometimes suffered assaults by drunken punters, which went unreported. Struggling to hold down a job owing to her drinking. Having been admitted to a temperance hospital on the Hampstead Road in Euston for a week. By Christmas 1936, she was employed as a cleaner at the Ross Institute for Tropical Diseases on Keppel Street. And supplemented by sex work, she moved into a small one-room lodging on the 2nd floor at 306 Euston Road, where she lived, sold sex, and just a few months later, she would be strangled to death. With the myth about a monster and the story of the Soho Strangler as dead and buried as his victims. Although most articles about this murdered woman was relegated, once again, to a small paragraph hidden within, the press's reporting was almost accurate. Any mistakes weren't malicious, just lazy. And their factual coverage of this case was reflected in the truthful testimony of the subsequent witnesses. Monday the 16th of August 1937 was Marie's last day alive. And it was as ordinary as any other. Dressed in a dark green jumper, a dark green frock, and a little black hat but no scarf. At 11:30 a.m, Marie entered the Golden Compass pub at 341 Euston Road, a short walk from her flat.
Hello, Marie. What are you having?
Served 2 pints of Reed Stout by Patrick Jordan, the barman, who had known this regular but heavy drinker for the last few months. He said she sat quietly in the corner with an unseen person and left by 12 p.m. At noon, alone, she entered the Adam and Eve pub at 284 Euston Road, a place she visited daily. Across a public bar and a saloon, it was sparsely filled with just 10 customers and a barman, many of whom knew her, liked her, and would chat with her that day. Later to be joined by the man who would murder her. Unlike the post-midnight sighting on Old Compton Street of the man who may have murdered Dutch Leia, the bar was brightly lit, relatively quiet, and there were few obstructions for the witnesses. Barman Joseph Clancy served Marie a large glass of Australian wine, and she engaged in conversations in French and broken English with several customers. At 1:05 p.m, Reginald Marshall, George Pratt, and Dominic Napolitan, 3 shopfitters on a lunch break, recalled seeing Marie happily chatting with 2 of her friends. May Kenny, a housewife, and Charles Damey, an electrician. May was drunk and slurring, but with a higher tolerance for booze, Marie held her own. Their mood was said to be normal. Throughout the next 2 to 3 hours, several customers entered the bar to buy off sales, with the bottles of takeaway beer being stamped and dated with the pub's details, as was the legal requirement. At 2 p.m, Marie spoke in broken English to Gertrude Calthorpe, a local waitress. Being a few drinks in, Marie was swaying and slurring. But never being unpleasant or aggressive, she was described as merry. At 2:20 p.m, while Marie chatted with May, who needed holding up, her killer entered the public bar. He didn't skulk, he didn't hide, and he wasn't in disguise. He just went to the bar and ordered a pint. Being by himself, Frederick Thomas Dobson, an unemployed miner living in a men's hostel in Camden Town, struck up a polite conversation with the man, and the 2 strangers enjoyed each other's company. Later questioned about the man he had spoken to for roughly 40 minutes, in daylight and at a distance of barely 2 feet, Frederick described him as mid-30s, 5'4", medium build, full face, sallow complexion, fair to brown hair parted to the side, clean-shaven, thick jaw, dressed in a dark brown suit with a distinctive stripe on his soft collar, tie, and waistcoat. He also noted he spoke with a Newcastle accent. Oddly, he didn't look foreign, he didn't sound menacing, and he didn't walk with an ape-like gait. This monster, who was just hours away from strangling Marie, looked as normal as any other man. Many of the witnesses gave similar descriptions of this man, with the ages ranging from early 20s to mid-40s, and physically described as short and thin, with a pasty round face, flushed in the cheeks, and wearing a brown suit with no hat. In truth, he was 24 years old, 5'3" high, 10 stone in weight, with a pale flushed face and brushback hair. But he was spot on about the Newcastle accent. To be honest, it didn't take much detective work to determine that Marie's killer was from that city in northern England. As over a pint, the man openly chatted about his life, both past and present. Frederick would state, he said that he worked as a miner in Wales, and Newcastle for roughly 6 years. During this conversation, Frederick saw Marie look across the bar, in their direction, and smile at the man. It seems odd that a man so hell-bent on murdering petite French brunettes would walk into a public bar and openly discuss the facts about his life. But he did. But then again, being so ordinary, if a murder hadn't have happened, would anyone have remembered him? At 2:40 p.m, as Marie chatted to Gertrude, she waved at the man and he smiled back. She wasn't afraid of him, and she told no one anything about him. But to her pal, she laughingly remarked, "I am getting off," which is prostitute slang for having sex with a punter, suggesting he was not a stranger. At 2:50 p.m, that same man chatted to George Bakewell, and although he didn't disclose his name, he spoke about being born in Newcastle, about how his last boxing match with a man named Maguire had ruined him, that until Monday morning he had worked at the Central Hotel in Marylebone, but was fired for upsetting a milk churn, and with him being unemployed and currently homeless. He showed me his work cards, and the two men agreed to meet up later so George could help him out. George waited at the pub from 5:30 p.m. till 6 p.m. as agreed. Only the man failed to turn up.
Last orders. Time, gentlemen, please.
At 3 p.m, with the pub due to close, as was the law, Marie ordered 2 pint bottles of Guinness as off sales, with each bottle stamped and dated with the pub's details and placed in a brown paper bag. Outside, several witnesses, including George Bakewell, the match seller, Frederick Dobson, the ex-miner, and Phyllis Kingham, a friend of Marie's, overheard this exchange between Marie and her killer, as well as it being witnessed by 2 passers-by, Thomas Leith, a fishmonger, and Henry Boone, a newspaper boy. He said, "Are you going to take me home?" She said, "Have you got any money?" To which he put his hand in his right trouser pocket and pulled out what looked, to anyone less drunk than Marie, to be a fistful of coins. But as some of those who saw this would state, it was no more than half a crown. As they walked away, heading down Euston Road and on to Hampstead Road, Marie shouted to Phyllis, "I'll see you tonight." And she laughed as the man tried to kiss her, with a cigarette still sticking out of his mouth. At 3:20 p.m, Marie and the man turned onto Seaton Street, a bustling market where you could buy fruit and vegetables, clothes and shoes, meats, fish, and takeaway foods like pease pudding and saveloys. When questioned, although many struggled to recall such an ordinary sight, numerous witnesses gave identical statements and descriptions to the police. There was no criminal kingpin threatening the witnesses to remain silent, or locals being too afraid to speak. These were just ordinary people, seeing a woman they knew to be a prostitute, walking a punter along her regular route back to her flat. It was so ordinary and normal that by the time the moment had passed, they had already forgotten it. At 3:25 p.m, Gertrude Calthorpe, Marie's friend from the pub, saw her heading west, being held up by the man, and appeared to be browsing several of the stalls on her way to Bath Row. At 3:30 p.m, Sadie Gibber, a fruiter's assistant, saw Marie. She'd clearly been drinking, she would state. The man was trying to coax her. As staggering along, she held the man's right hand. And with the neighbouring stall being closed that day, she was annoyed as she couldn't get any meat for her cat. About the same time, Reuben Packcroft, a bookseller who often sold Marie copies of true detective stories, stated she was not steady on her feet. The man he described as a jolly chap held her by the arm. He was amused and laughing. In court, Reuben would testify, "I have known her to be in the company of this man 2 or 3 times prior." It makes sense, as with her killer potentially being a person she liked and trusted, she would willingly let him into her home, maybe make him a cup of tea, and possibly prepare him a meal. If all he stole was the money he paid her, it would be impossible to prove whether a robbery had taken place. Having assaulted her, there may not have been any sex or rape, as his mind may have been on his escape. And with no hint of fear, she may have been strangled before her mouth could utter a single scream. Being angry and drunk, he may have fled before he left any fingerprints. And as an ordinary bloke, he could vanish, not through his own devious cunning, but because no one had noticed him. Just like Dutch Leia, at 3:40 p.m, Marie and her killer were seen entering her home at 306 Euston Road, where later she would be found strangled. Henry Radley, a fishmonger from next door, was outside of this address pumping up his bike tire, when they both passed him at the entry to Bath Row. He would state, "The woman was in front. She opened the door with a key. The man, as he was on the steps, turned to me and smiled as they both entered the building." But unlike Dutch Lair, 2 tenants saw them inside the building. Mrs. Kathleen Euler on the first floor passed them on the stairs. And living 1 floor above Marie, as she entered her bins, Eva Schladover saw her being assisted up the stairs by a man, and then together they entered her 2nd floor lodging. At roughly 4 p.m, Marie put on the wireless radio, as was typical, and Eva stated, "I heard them singing and clapping to the music." It remained on for the rest of the afternoon, and as far as I know, Marie did not leave. At some point during the music, French Marie was murdered by a serial strangler. As before, no one saw or heard the last sounds of her demise. But why would they, when everyone's focus was on living their own lives? Thuds are mistaken, cries drift on the wind, screams get drowned out by horn honks, and even an ordinary murderer could vanish unseen, being just a face in a bustling crowd. At 6 p.m, a time verified by Mary Connell, who heard the whistle at the scent factory blow, said she saw thick plumes of dark smoke pour from a 2nd floor window. Alerting Ghulam Mustafa, an Indian waiter on the ground floor, and Eva Schladover on the 3rd. They spotted smoke seeping into the hallway from the slightly ajar door of Marie's room. Mustafa knocked, got no reply, so they entered. As a small bed sitting room, barely big enough for a small bed, a table, an armchair, a set of drawers and a washstand. A small fire was lightly smouldering, as an oil lamp had probably smashed in the sink, igniting a few rags, maybe a towel or a flannel, as well as a curtain which encircled the washstand for privacy. Ghulam stamped out the burning cloths. Eva opened a window for air. And as the smoke cleared, on the bed they saw Marie. Fully clothed, her feet on the floor, her legs apart, and a cloth covering her face. As a drunk woman, prone to mishaps and afternoon naps, they thought she was sleeping, and with the fire out, they let her rest. Switching off the music to give her peace, they closed the door. Unaware that she would never wake. It would be another murder, mistaken for an accident, and in one case, a suicide. But it was nothing clever. It wasn't premeditated, and there was no criminal mastermind pulling the strings of conspiracy. As with everything in life, we see what we want to see. if we believe this is the work of a cunning serial strangler, stalking Soho streets in search of similar-looking sex workers, who planned each crime scene down to the tiniest of details, then that is what we will see. But if, like the police, we see a drunken punter whose anger sparked a moment of madness, who hastily erased even the briefest traces of himself before he fled unseen, then that is what we will see. The press will write what they write, and the reader will choose to believe what they will believe. But if you write it, it becomes fact. If you repeat it, it becomes proof. And if it appears in enough books, read by enough people who are willing to accept it as the truth, it becomes irrefutable as cast iron evidence. An hour later, long after her killer had vanished amidst the thick city smog, Gertrude Calthorpe had her daughter deliver a letter to Marie. With her still seemingly sleeping, as soundly as when they had left her, Mustafa and Eva accompanied the girl, and on the silent bed, they tried to rouse this motionless lady. Mustafa shook her arm, but she did not wake. Eva called her name, but she did not stir. Having pulled the cloth from her face, the threesome didn't recoil in shock, as her face wasn't a twisted mess of pain. If anything, it looked peaceful. With no ligature around her neck, and her face an odd shade. Suspecting that this chronic alcoholic had died in her sleep, they called the police. The first constable arrived at 7:25 p.m. An ambulance followed, and with her certified as dead, Dr. Alexander Baldy, the police surgeon, followed, and as was protocol in a suspicious death, the CID came too. Within the hour, the police would confirm that French Marie had been murdered. With no witnesses, no obvious robbery, no signs of a struggle, and no ransacking of the room, it looked unnervingly similar to the 3 other murders. But what made this one stand out was a crucial clue, as not only had 20 people seen his face, with some even hearing his possible life history, but this time he had left his fingerprints. Since Fifi's murder, the police had dismissed any notion of a serial killer, stating in a report dated the 9th of September 1937, the newspaper suggested that this murder, Marie's, was connected with the cases of strangulation of prostitutes in Soho in 1935 and 36. We have convinced them they are wrong. By this point, the press had lost interest and fixated on the belief that the most likely suspect would be a punter with a history of violence, especially strangulation, against prostitutes, who had links to Soho and the West End, and who, most likely, matched the suspect last seen with Dutch Leia. The police went in search of a suspect. Not a crime boss, a monster, a bohemian, or a Jew, but an ordinary man. This tried and trusted technique had failed 3 times before, with each inquest concluding that these women were murdered by persons unknown. Only this time, it was different. This time they had his face. This time they had his history. This time they had his fingerprints. And exactly as they had stated, right at the very start, they would arrest a man who had recently been convicted for strangling 2 sex workers. The police's most promising suspect in the murder of French Marie was a young, brown-haired serial strangler who visited prostitutes in Soho. The final part of the Soho Strangler concludes next week. So there you have it, folks. There you have it. Oh my God, we're so close to the end. Oh, but I'm enjoying myself, which is important. Oh, I'm going to take you a little hat off. There you go. I'm enjoying this, telling this story, because it's so complicated and different, but it moves and shifts so much. And we're trying to explore a lot of ideas of not accepting the facts that you're given, not just accepting, reading, open a paper and going, oh, well, this is all the information, it must be true, or books, or documentaries, or films, or anything, just accepting things that are fact. What I'm trying to do is say to you, here's the evidence about this particular case, now go away and look at all the other cases, have a look at Jack the Ripper, have a look at whatever, look at them and say, hang on, what's true? What do we know? Someone going past with a wheelie suitcase? That would ordinarily be edited out with me going, you mother of pearl, how dare you, mother of pearl, I'm trying to record here, but I'm not. So anyway, this is Extra Mile, unscripted, unedited bit. We'll do some quiz questions in a bit. We'll do some extra stuff. I've still got to write the concluding part. I know what I've got, all my bits are in there, but I'm going to be cautious about what I tell you next, because I've been really cautious with this episode. This has been a fun episode to write, I'll admit. Sometimes, like with the Blackout Ripper, I deliberately wrote that where it was a killer in plain sight. And if you listen to episodes 1, 2, 3 and 4, before you see him in ep 5, he's there. He's always there. He's in the background. He's there. He's right in your sight. He's not hiding. And that's the whole point about Blackout Ripper. He's in your sight. He's not hiding in the shadows like a moo-ha-ha with a cape and a top hat and running into the fog like a twat. This is just a regular guy who murders prostitutes who's in plain sight. This is even more stark. This is, we see him. He talked to people. He spoke about his life. Do you know, this is what makes it really interesting, is that he's not hiding who he is. He just is who he is. So this is going to take us to episode 10. So yeah, this is all very exciting. Let me go and put on my tea. I have prepped it. I think I've done myself a coffee, a cup of coffee. There we go. Let's pop that on. Have I prepped that? Yeah, looks like I'm having a coffee. So that'll go cold in a bit and I'll go, I don't like that. So yeah, this is almost ready to go. So what are we on now? I don't even know what the date is. I'm whizzing through these now. 12th of March. You'll be in April. I'm trying to get ahead because this has taken up so much time. I want to focus on the single part episodes to take us through for the rest of the year. I've researched them, I sat down, I've done a lot of pieces, but there's some that they still need going over and redoing and all that. Anyway, what's going on? Moving the boat tomorrow, whoopee-doo, moving it, which means I won't be near my regular Starbucks, which is a shame. I've been there since, I've been using and abusing that since January, so if I move my boat further north, I think there's another Starbucks there, but I won't be in my same seat. I won't know the people. Oh, such a shame. There's swans knocking against my boat. Oh, now I'm coughing. Yeah, they're knocking against the boat. I think they've heard that I'm a soft touch for the coots. Fuck off. Trying not to eat cake at the moment because I've put on a lot of weight. I've ballooned out over Christmas. I've enjoyed the treats. Piss off. They're still there. So, yeah, no cake at the moment. What else is going on? Not much. I've got to fix my water filter. I'm not very good at shit like this. But anyway, hopefully by the time you hear this, I will have fixed it. What else is going on? Oh, a thank you to new Patreon supporters. Piss off. See, they're back. You hear them right behind me banging away saying, where's my bloody food? Thank God I'm not recording the regular part, the proper part of this. I'm just recording this shite, which, who cares? So thank you to new Patreon supporters, James Marigold and The Shy One. So thank you, James, and thank you, The Shy, whatever your first name is. Thank you. Also, a thank you to Pam Kitchen for the Starbucks voucher. That's very kind of you. Thank you very much. So that will be spent on decaf soya lattes and decaf hot chocolate. Swans are still there banging. Oh, so annoying. I tell you what, let me do the quiz questions now and then we'll dive into some stuff. So get ready. Right. Question number 1. Let's hope I'm still recording. I am. Question number 1. What was French Marie's birth name according to her birth certificate? Question number 2. In what building was she born? Question number 3. What was the name of her possible father? Question number 4. What job did Ghulam Mustafa do? He was the guy who kind of tried to rouse her at the end of the episode. Question number 5. PCAG should be able to get this. What 2 brands of... Fuck off! What 2 brands of stout was she drinking? It's really annoying. You can hear them right behind me. They just won't shut up. They're like, oh, give us some food. Oh, you can piss off, go elsewhere. So question number 5, what 2 brands of stout was Marie drinking? Question number 6, what could Marie not buy at the market that day? So when she was going along the stalls, what could she not buy? Question number 7, what was the fishmonger doing outside of the murder location when the killer smiled at him? Question number 8, what hospital did Marie recently go to for a week prior to her death? Oh, coffee's up. You have to wait for episode 9 in a bit. Yep, I can see them outside my window. Swans. Oh, they're getting algae off the bottom of the boat. I think. Let me just have a look. Yeah, they're getting algae off the bottom of the boat, but they're also saying, "Where's my effing food?" Oh, it's just one. It's just one annoying swan. Well, there we go. I think they just know that I'm a soft touch. Piss off. So where did I get to? Question number 9. What job did Marie's lover Norman Norris do? And question number 10. What colour was Marie's hair? So there you go. We'll do the answers to those very shortly. So let's dive into some stuff to do with this place. So unfortunately, the building itself has long since been demolished. 306 Euston Road. I've got some pictures of the pub itself, so the Adam and Eve, which was on the corner. So if you go up Tottenham Court Road, so from Soho up to Tottenham Court Road, you get to Warren Street Tube Station, over the road, over the A501, which is built in the 1960s. Over that, on the left-hand side, you'll see a big tower block, and that's Euston Tower. That is where 306 Euston Road used to be. It was on the left-hand side, and then Bath Row was kind of like a side street, which was how you got entrance to it. Unfortunately, that was long since demolished with the extension of the A501, so it's not there anymore. What else have we got? It was above a radio store, which was a part exchange. It did easy terms for radios. Marie's radio was actually bought by her boyfriend, Norris Norton, I think his name was. On the ground floor, Ghulam lived there along with Francis Gomez. Francis was out at the time of the murder. On the first floor, there was another Eva Gorius, who was a commie chef, and Kumus Lacey, who was a porter. They were both out. Second floor was Elsie. She occupied the front room. The back room was unoccupied. So these are same as all the other locations that we've been to before. It's above a shop, entrance by a street door, and normally it'd be 3 flats, but what they've done is they've subdivided it, turned it into 6 flats. Except the top one, Eva Schladever and her husband Kaufman were on the 3rd floor, which was the top floor. That swan is still there. Piss off! Unless you're getting rid of the algae, then please do. So it was quite a small room. She'd been there technically since May 1935, so she'd been there a little while. It had a little bed in there, a table, an armchair, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. A writing desk and other articles of furniture. It had electric lighting, but she tended to use an oil lamp, which is how the fire started. I'll give you some details about her. It was hard to pin down who she was, because in the press they only talk about her being the French woman or French Marie or sometimes French Suzette, which was, hope you enjoyed the little deception I did in episode 7 or 8 when we were leading to the idea that he was going to murder another petite French brunette who was known as French Suzette, which is technically true, but it was this French Suzette, not another one. When you look at a lot of, if you think about it, like, none of these prostitutes really use their names, so piss off! That swan just won't piss off. That's really annoying. What was I saying about names? So there's a lot of French Maries, there's a lot of French Fifis, a lot of French Suzettes. It's like, it's just a name you pick up, it's a name you use. It makes it easier to kind of get away with kind of piss off. It makes it easier to get away with a lot of crimes, because, you know, they say, oh, I saw a prostitute called French Suzette. It's like, well, which one? There's about 100 of them. So, but can you hear him? Just so annoying. Just piss off. So yeah, she went by multiple names. She preferred to be called Marie. Some people called her Elsie. Some people called her Charlotte. She went by her birth surname, her married surname. She even used her potential father's surname. So, but some people also knew her as Paulette. God, that swan won't piss off. It's really annoying. It's like there's so many boats to choose from. What is he doing? Is he just banging on the side, or is he just being a... I don't know. He seems to be going... I don't know whether he doesn't seem to be low enough to be going after the algae. Oh, bloody swans. Anyway, she was 5'3", 48 years old, medium build, pale complexion, rouged cheeks. Her hair colour was... as in the question. She seemed to be a very nice person. She could get a little bit argumentative when drunk, but everyone said that she was relatively pleasant. She spoke fluent French, as you'd expect, but broken English, which is odd because her mother was English. At least, as far as we know, her mother was English. She may not have been. But because she was raised in France, that kind of throws everything off. She went into foster care in Boulogne-sur-Mer in France, which is pretty much by Boulogne, so northern France. I managed to pin it down to Our Day of the Day convent, and she attended there until 1905 when she was 16 years old. She returned... so she must have had a connection to the West End, or maybe her mother had a connection there, because they moved onto Whitfield Street, which is just off Trafalgar Square. Her mother was living with a man, we don't know his name, apparently he was German, and he was the manager of Frascati's restaurant on Whitfield Street. We don't know much about him. It didn't seem to last long. She didn't seem to get on well with her mother. Later on, when they questioned different people who knew about her life, they said she didn't know if her mother was alive or dead. So that's kind of what the relationship was like. Victor Augustin Tochen, born 1888, was a French citizen. He would become her husband. He was living with his wife Bertha on Whitcomb Street, which is long since demolished. That's just off Trafalgar Square. She was originally from Goole in Yorkshire. He was a resident of France. His wife died. Marie moved in to live with them, and then she married him. But was this a marriage of convenience? We don't know, because she seemed to marry him when she was 16/17. She'd only just been in the country, probably a couple of months. The marriage didn't last long. She disappeared off with someone called Mr. Richard, who we know is French. So Mr. Richard is an alias. So I got hiccups now. He was an alias. We don't know anything about him except he was called Mr. Richard. Probably not his real name. She disappeared with him from London to Paris, and then they went to Guadeloupe. So apparently he was something to do with the newspaper business. We don't know why they were there. We don't know what they were doing. She joined him there for about 6 years. Just kind of vanished from that point. She couldn't get a divorce from Victor. They seemed to get on well. You know, they didn't seem to have any problems with each other. They didn't see each other. In 1939, he was listed as a widower. He was working as a still room man at Mayfair Court, which meant it was a hotel and it had its own distillery, so he did that. Some months later, I think it was early 1930s, he bumped into her in Leicester Square. So that's 1920. He bumped into her in Leicester Square and said that he thought she was living off prostitution by that point, which she was. Her life is incredibly vague. I mean, she moves around a lot. She doesn't seem to be in one place for too long. This seems to be the thing that happened in kind of the turn of the early century, is that, unfortunately, I think we're going to end up that way in this country as well, because London is so expensive that people can't afford to buy places. Most people have to either live out and travel in, and especially in the heart of London, renting is just almost impossible now. So back then, people were lodging kind of from week to week. So no one really owned anywhere. No one kind of had a place to settle. We know that she was a prostitute, but she was more of a casual prostitute. She did a series of jobs as a waitress in several French cafes and restaurants. Soho and Fitzrovia has a real kind of huge French community, so it's kind of easy for her, if she doesn't speak English, to kind of work in French cafes and restaurants. She was a chambermaid, she was a waitress. English wasn't good, it was incredibly limited, but, fluent in French, so that kind of helped. She used prostitution to supplement her income. We've already mentioned about her 2 criminal records. She only had 2. Although, if my notes are correct, I think some of it may have been missing. So this sometimes happens when you go in and the file is incomplete. October 1920... at this point, her photograph was taken. Her fingerprints were taken as well. Because don't forget, she was charged under the name of Elsie and her father's surname. See, I'm getting good at not giving away quiz questions. Because this was a false, they used her photograph and they got her fingerprints. Therefore, when she was next convicted, they were able to say, "You're not Elsie, your father's surname, you are blah blah blah." She was sentenced to 3 months in prison and released December 1920, and that was she was convicted at Marlborough Street Police Court. Again, the same police court that we've referenced a couple of times in here. Like Fifi and Leia, she didn't seem to associate much with many sex workers. She knew some. She kind of would chat to them, but she wasn't kind of. She'd been a sex worker for years, kind of casual. She didn't really know them that well. Many of them were friends, but that was about it. Many aliases, as mentioned: Marie, Paulette, Suzette, or the French woman. What else we got? Her lover, Norris John Norton, born 1890. He was 47 at the time, so roughly the same age as her. He lived not too far away on Cleveland Street in Fitzrovia, long since demolished. He was in the habit of seeing her daily and assisting her financially, he would say. He met her 12 years ago. They'd been friends for 6, and then they became more intimate. He said, "We became friendly for the next 6 years, but I became tired because of her excessive drinking. We were on intimate relations until about a month ago. Then I I've given her small sums of money from time to time, and about 6 months ago I gave her a wireless set. So that was his radio that he gave her that kind of blocked out the noise of her murder. Jean-Emile Louis Armand. This was the kind of man she was seeing 1930 to 1933. She was living with him and his wife. Then his wife died and she kind of moved in with him. We don't know whether he was her pimp. Norris would state she was always in fear of him. He charged her with stealing her wallet, and again he threw pepper in her face in the street. Not a nice man. She was always being asked by him for money. She lived with him on Chitty Street, which is in Fitzrovia. She called him Papa. He was deported 4 years ago. He was 60 years old, over 6 foot tall, and wore glasses. So he's definitely not the man who was seen with Dutch Leia. The question is, did he pimp her out, or was he a ponce? We don't know. They seem to argue a lot. He kicked her frequently out of the house. She moved into a lodging on Windmill Street, W1. And then she moved into the LCC hostel in High Holborn. This was a women's hostel. And he was deported 8th of February 1933, so that's 4 years earlier. Her work, she did various jobs. She always seemed to be working. She always seemed to be trying to earn regular income. She worked at the Antoine Cafe on Charlotte Street, the Howard Hotel for a month, the Strand Palace Hotel, which we covered with the murder by Bernard Smith. The Ivanhoe Hotel in Bloomsbury, don't know that one. She was there for 6 months and she left kind of mid-December. She worked at the Cumberland Hotel in Marble Arch, which was where the Blackout Ripper met his first victim, Evelyn Hamilton. Yeah. Unfortunately, she had an accident owing to a fall when she was drunk, and therefore she had to go to hospital. Where was the hospital? That's one of the quiz questions. Her final job, she was still doing this job at the time of her murder. She was employed as a cleaner at the Ross Institute for Tropical Diseases at Keppel Street. This is now known as the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. It's still there today. And she was on a fortnightly holiday from there and was due to go back on the 23rd of August. So that's why she wasn't at work that day and getting a bit pissed. She was on a holiday. I mean, that's what you do on a holiday, isn't it? Why not? Get pissed. Already mentioned about the flat. I think that's that. Seemed to be quite a social person. She often drank more when times were tough. Unfortunately, she started drinking at work, which caused her a lot of problems. And because of that, she started putting on a lot more weight. Norris would say her great weakness was her fondness for drink, and this was the reason for her dismissal from practically every situation she held. She was well known in most of the pubs in the local area, and as you've seen in the episode, she would go from pub to pub. She regularly took snuff and smoked a little bit, and she purchased the American magazine True Detective Stories from the stall at the back. That's not the quiz question. If you think I've given it away, I haven't. There was a slight argument with Norris prior. I didn't go into this in the episode because the police had already looked into him and anyone, because in the earlier episodes we've kind of gone, oh, there's potentially, this is the police's key suspect, so we'll look at him, and then it turns out not to be him. I thought, let's not go into all that again. Let's just cover it really quickly. All these men who were in their life, the police investigated them thoroughly. Nothing. There's nothing there, so we can just move on from that. He said, I saw her at her rooms at 306 Euston Road on the 9th of August 1937, where I spent about a quarter of an hour with her, somewhere about 9:30. I know of no one person associated with her answering the description. We'll get into that next week. The reason for this brief visit was the fact that she was half drunk and when in this condition was particularly quarrelsome. Ordinarily, I would see her every evening and spent about an hour and a quarter with her, providing she was sober. When the police looked in the room, they found articles of men's clothing at the scene, such as slippers and a sports coat, but when they checked them, they turned out to be Norris's. No one seemed to have threatened her at any point. She didn't seem to have any pimps. Don't forget, she's a casual prostitute. She kind of only does it when she needs to supplement her income. So this is not a daily regular thing. And because she's on holiday, getting drunk, why not earn a bit of cash on the side? This would have been a time before holiday pay as well. So, you're taking a holiday, but you're not going to earn any money. Oh, so there we go. Next. Oh, that's all the questions. I'll do the quiz questions in a bit. Oh, stretch. Oh. So, next week is the final episode. No red herrings. We're going to dive into the prime suspect. No, there won't be one of these ones where we go, it's a possible suspect. This is the one. Now, this was never reported in the press. They didn't seem to make the connection, and as far as I can tell in all of the police reports, because I've read all of the files to do with every single one of these cases, the police didn't seem to have made the connection either, or if they did, they didn't put it into any of the murder files. Maybe they did make a connection, maybe they investigated it, maybe they decided there wasn't enough evidence. But this is in order to solve the Soho Strangler case, this is about as near as anyone's ever got. There's been a lot of bullshit, which is why I've tried to go through all of the press reports and all the police reports, and I've tried to make this as balanced as possible. So when I give you something, I take it away, and I give you something else, and I take it away, and I try not to be too clinical about it, because what I want you to do is to make your own conclusions about this. So next week we will dive into the suspect, the big one. But is he the Soho Strangler? It's up to you to decide. So let's do the quiz questions. Question number 1: what was French Marie's birth name according to her birth certificate? It was Lottie Asterley. She would go under the name of Elsie Lottie Asterley, but that's not her real name. When you look at her birth certificate, it's Lottie is her surname. Sorry, Lottie is her first name. So, but she changed it to Elsie Charlotte Asterley. Question number 2: in what building was she born? It was the Croydon Workhouse. It was actually in the infirmary. Question number 3: what was the name of her possible father? It was McMahon. Question number 4: what job did Ghulam Mustafa do? He was a waiter. Come on, PCAG, you've got to get this one. Question number 5: what 2 brands of stout was she drinking that night? It was Guinness and Reed's Stout. Although here's a shocker for everyone. When I met up with PCAG a little while ago, he didn't have a Guinness. He was joining me on the neck oil. There you go. What's going on in the world? I know. Question number 6: what could Marie not buy at the market that day? It was meat for her cat. So back then they used to do a lot of cat meat stalls, and oddly, see, you could make another connection here. People could go, oh my God, the connection. Do you know when people love to make bullshit connections and they go, oh, you see these 2 things, are they connected? There was a cat meat stall outside of Marie's murder and one outside of Red Max's as well. But so what? It's like, but that's what I'm trying to get across with the episode, is you can make connections. But if you want to see connections, there will be connections. But if you decide that there are no connections, there are no connections. Information isn't as solid as it's meant to be. It depends on how you present it and how you absorb it. And if someone writes it a certain way, you're going to receive it a certain way. Whereas if they write it a different way, you'll receive it that way. So, this whole series is about opening your mind and how you absorb things and how you take it on board, and accepting the fact that when you have someone writing something or presenting something for you, it doesn't mean that that's 100% accurate. That's just their interpretation, and how you interpret it is your choice. But if you can be more selective about what you're kind of taking on board, letting into your head, how you disseminate it, then that's kind of better, especially for true crime, when it's kind of about solving things. Like, sometimes people come out with some bullshit theories and you just go, holy shit, you read one book and one documentary and you've stuck with that for the rest of your life. Ugh. So But everyone's different. Everyone's different. Right, question number 7. What was the fishmonger doing outside of the murder location when the killer smiled at him? He was pumping up his bike tyre. Question number 8. What hospital did Marie recently go into for a week prior to her death? It was the Temperance Hospital on the Hampstead Road, which is only a couple of doors down from where the first possible murder victim of the Blackout Ripper was found. And that's actually where she was. They reckon she was standing near the bus stop when she may have been lured in or dragged into the derelict building. Question number 9. What job did Marie's lover, Norman Norris, do? He was a draper. He ran a drapery shop on Cleveland Street with his wife. And question number 10. What colour was Marie's hair? She wasn't a brunette. It was reddish brown. But let's not forget, this is kind of a key thing that I wanted to put in there, because when you look at kind of how people describe the suspects, we've gone through this before about how people see the same person in different ways. But nighttime, it's like, how can you tell a person's colour of hair at night? You can tell the difference between blonde and black, probably, and then everything in between is a bit of a merge, really. So, some people say fair-haired, some people said he was dark brown. He was dark brown, but with her, people would say she's brunette. Some people say she was red, but she was more kind of a reddy brown. So it's hard to pin things down. Oh, that was a long waffle. That was an Uber waffle. So I'm going to shut up now. That's me done. I'm going to go to the new Starbucks, have a walk along the canal because I've had no exercise today, have a coffee and start editing this. So I hope you enjoyed that. That was part 9. Part 10 next week. Part 10 next week. We'll do that. My coffee's about to spill. We'll do all that, and then we'll have Soho Strangler week, where I will sit down and I'll really, instead of telling a story, I will just go through all the facts and we can try and disseminate it into pieces. So there we go. That'll be Soho Strangler week. So I hope you enjoyed that. Have yourself a good week, folks. Stay safe and be good. Lots of love. Bye bye.